Hello, everybody, wherever you find yourself in time and space. My name is Morten. This is Making Sense of, and today I have the distinguished pleasure of talking to a longtime hero of mine, Casey Fiesler. Casey, welcome.
Thank you.
I have to say, this is I have a bit of a fanboy type moment here because when I returned to philosophy a couple of years ago, because I realized that I needed to dive back into tech ethics after just being a tech worker for a decade, one of the first things I found was you, because you were working on this. Was it the tech ethics curricula? Whoops, for for different things. Sorry, my microphone just fell off.
Oh no.
I'll
Uh,
stick it on again.
so I
There,
think you
now I can hear me.
mean the like giant spreadsheet of tech ethics syllabi.
Yeah. The
Uh,
giant spreadsheet of tech ethics syllabi.
I can actually tell the story behind that if you want, because I think it's kind of interesting.
Yes, please do.
um, so, and I think this is 2018. Um, Kathy O'Neill, who I adore. Weapons of Mass Destruction is one
Mhm.
of the books that I often recommend to people because it's very accessible. But she wrote an op-ed that implied that academics were like totally asleep at the wheel when it came to tech ethics, or at least that's how it was interpreted. Um, and a lot of people were then saying like, oh yeah, the problem with like ethics and computer science is that no one is teaching them ethics. And I was like, yes, they are. Like a lot of people are. And a lot of times, the people who are doing this work, like the teaching and the research, are people whose voices are often suppressed anyway. So
Mhm.
I was like, I guess I could ask all my friends, like, or like try to think of people who are teaching classes. And then I was like, why don't I just create an openly editable spreadsheet and tell people to link to the syllabi for their ethics classes? And I never expected it to take off like it did. I think it was partly because Cory Doctorow wrote about it in Boing Boing, and then it really took off. And an interesting side effect of that is that I wasn't doing any research at the time on ethics education. I was just like I was teaching and I
Mhm.
was doing ethics research, but I wasn't looking at education. And then people thought because I'd created this spreadsheet that I was an expert on ethics education and computer science and started asking me to like be on panels and give talks. And so I was like, I guess I need to become one. And so like seriously, that is part of the reason why I started doing a bunch of research on ethics education and computer science was because people thought I was an expert. And so I decided I needed to become one.
That's that's how it works, right? It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
that's
it
the
was cool.
story of a lot of academic research. It's like, I saw this dog walking past me on the street, and I had this thought, and I just said something about it. And then 2 years later, I was in a PhD program talking about dog communication. Like that's, but the reason why I found what that spreadsheet was so interesting was I had that same feeling, right? Because I work in tech. And I've been talking about the importance of ethics in tech for years, like years before that. I kept asking, like, these companies do things that, on the face of it, just the most cursory review of it, you're like, there are huge problems with this. Like, there's no way this passed any kind of moral standard or ethical test of any kind. How did this happen, right? And I would ask people, like, did you talk about this stuff when you went to school or wherever you were? And the consistent answer is no, right? Or it was oh yeah, like when I started university, I had like 6 months of philosophy to start off, right? And then there was some ethics stuff in there, and oh yeah, you like Aristotle, right? And that's the end of it. And I started looking like, what are the curricula that exist? And then this spreadsheet showed up, like, serendipitously in, I think, Boing Boing or The Verge or something. And I'm like, oh, there, okay, there's an actual resource. And I started reading through it. But what I saw is the there's a lot, but it's not consistent. Like,
Mm,
it's very all over the place, right?
mm,
And it brings me to this thing that I wanted to ask you about, because it's something I think about a lot, which is, in most industries that have a direct impact on people and people's lives, there are professional ethics, with the one glaring exemption that is all design and all technology work. Unless you're a member of ACM, for example, but that is not like they're not a governing body and they don't control anything, right? So let's just start at that simple, basic question. How can we have ethics for this industry, and how would we enforce that?
What a great question. It's really hard. And you mentioned ACM, and like ACM does have a code of ethics. And it was revised recently in 2018. And my PhD advisor was one of the people who was involved in revising it. That was the first time that it had been revised at all since 1992.
Sounds about right.
But as you say, it can't really be enforced. Like, as far as I'm aware, sort of the worst thing that can happen to you if you violate the ACM code of ethics is that you get kicked out of the ACM. And that's probably more of an issue for academics because there's some penalties within ACM that mean you can't publish or you can't go to conferences. But for a software engineer at a tech company, like, they're probably not an ACM member anyway. So people often will bring up, like, should we have licensing the same way that we do for like doctors and lawyers? But I think that part of the challenge for that is like, who gets licensed? Like, do like the middle schoolers who are learning to code for the first time? Like, you don't have to be working, as a software engineer, as a technologist to like do harm. You can do a lot of harm with a little bit of code. And so I suppose one can maybe make an argument for like it being by company, but even that gets really, really tricky. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's hard to think about licensing, is because like, who gets licensed? And yeah.
I'm asking you because it's such a hard question, and it's a question that comes up a lot when you start talking to people about it. Is this, why don't we have this? But then who would do it? And then the pushback, which is, why would anyone, some evil governing body sit and tell me what I can and cannot do? And I find that that's a big challenge in having this conversation at all, is that there's this sense, at least like, especially in like the open source community, that any kind of imposed ethics, no matter how soft it is an infringement on the freedoms of the individual creator to do whatever they want.
Yeah. I mean, I've certainly seen my share of pushback for talking about this at all. Especially, like, frankly, a lot of that recently has come in the like AI ethics world. Like, a lot of people see conversations about AI ethics as being about like stifling innovation. Something that I say a lot, and like most of the talks that I've been giving recently have like a slide about this at the very end, is that like, you are obligated to critique the things that you love. Like, I strongly believe that. So, if you think that AI is going to change the world and it's super amazing, then like, you should be the most critical of what's happening, because you should want it to be the best that it can possibly be. And you don't want something to be amazing at the expense of like hurting people. And I think that most technologists, most computer scientists do not actively want to hurt people. Sometimes, I mean,
yeah, no,
I'd say most. And you can say things about business incentives and that sort of thing. But like, for example, people often ask me like, oh, you teach an ethics class to computer science students. So like, do they come out of your class more ethical people? Like, do you teach them to care about other people? And I'm like, I don't think that most of the students come into my class not caring about other people, or like certainly not actively wanting to hurt people, and the vast majority of them actively do not want to hurt people. It's less about like learning to be a good person, and more for the people who legitimately want to be good people, which again I do think is most people. Be optimistically, but I do think that it's about learning the things that will help you know when you might be hurting people, and that is actually really hard. Like being able to spot the potential problems is really hard, particularly when it's easiest to imagine potential harms to people like yourself.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, technological harms disproportionately impact people from marginalized groups. And so if you have a class of middle class white men imagining harms to middle class white men, then like you have a problem.
Yeah. Well, I think this is kind of the key that, and I think there's a difference in the way people who have studied philosophy or have dived into this subject of ethics thinks about ethics versus the rest of the world. That for us, it's very much this is a tool or a set of tools you use to view the world or be critical of the world and be critical of decisions. And then you use these frameworks and tools to figure out, is this something that may cause harm? And how do I define that harm? And who gets to decide whether there is harm? And how do we mitigate the harm, or do we avoid this problem altogether by moving around it? And has everyone been, there's all these pieces. But for people on the outside, it often feels like ethics is a list of do's and don'ts. And when you see when you see the list, it's either like, this is stifling my creativity, or as long as I check these boxes, I'm fine. Like the ethics washing thing that's going on. And I feel like you're centrally positioned in this because you're actually teaching a class on this at a university level. So how do you educate people on, like, people, not just in the classroom, but how do we move this community forward to see ethics as a tool, as part of a toolkit rather, or as part of the process rather than this other thing that exists that some people care about?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that last bit is a sort of fundamental problem that I've been thinking about for a number of years now. After Cambridge Analytica, which of course, is like one of the, well, actually, interestingly now, like undergrads now, like when I'm teaching 20-year-olds, they have never heard of it before, because like it was 4
So
years
long
ago, and
ago.
they were like
Yeah.
freshmen in high school. Yeah, exactly. So I because I used to always use that as the example. Like, let me explain Cambridge Analytica to you so you can sound smart, but people don't care anymore. Young people. Anyway, after that, there was an op-ed, and I can't remember where it was published, the Boston Globe maybe, written by a former Google engineer, and it was like, computer science faces an ethics crisis. And one of the points that he made in that op-ed really resonated with me, and it was something like, software engineers continue to treat safety and ethics as specialties rather than the foundation of all design.
Mhm.
And I was like, yes. And I actually think that one of the reasons that is true is because that is very often how we teach ethics in computer science. So like when I was a PhD student, I taught the required ethics and professionalization class for computer science students, and it was a senior level class.
Mhm.
So they took it at the very end. And so like they get to me and they've spent 3 years learning how to be a computer scientist and all of the like values associated with that, efficiency, optimization. And
ROI
then
on everything.
yeah, and then they get to me and I'm like, here's the stuff you should have been thinking about all along.
Uh-huh.
Except like, are they really going to be convinced about that when they haven't heard about this for 3 years? Um, and often, even when it's a required class, it feels like an elective, like it's separate from everything else that they're
Yeah.
doing. And so you can get this sense that like this is a specialization in the same way that, not everyone who works in tech like needs to be an expert on machine learning,
Or
right?
accessibility.
Or oh, that's a really it's actually
Uh-huh.
very similar to
Yes.
accessibility. Yeah, exactly. And so like there's a sense that like, oh, and you hear this phrase all the time, the like, oh, I'm just the engineer, or I'm just the computer scientist, and those are like exact quotes. Um, and so this is one of the reasons why I got really involved in initiatives to like integrate ethics throughout computing curriculum. Um, so that instead of siloing it, it's the things that are relevant to a particular class are discussed in that class. So like, and the example I often give is like, I'm not saying that like the machine learning professors need to read Kant. Like you like like you're not going to be teaching deontology in your machine learning class. You should
Yeah.
be teaching machine learning ethics, like
Mhm.
the thing that is relevant to that thing. And then you should also be taking like a standalone ethics class taught by an expert. Like it should be both of these things. It's that important. Um, and actually a metaphor that I use for this sometimes is that there's someone whose job on a construction site is to be the safety engineer. Like that's
Mhm.
someone's job. It is a specialization. You know all the things, but that doesn't mean that like the person putting up the drywall sees a giant rusty nail sticking out of the ground and is like, there might be a problem with that. I'm not totally sure, but that's the safety engineer's problem to deal
Yeah.
with. Like you should at least be able to recognize the rusty nail as a problem. And like if you need to go get the safety engineer, you can go get them. um, so I wrote this thing at the time where like the pithy little tagline was something like, if you work in tech and you don't think about ethics, you're bad at your job.
Yeah.
Which I think is true.
It is
A lot of
true.
people do not agree with me on that. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to be an expert. Like it is also a specialization, and there are also experts, and those people should be hired, and there should be the person that you can go to get help, but also everyone should be thinking about it too.
Yeah. It is very much the same as accessibility. Because that's like my last slide in every talk I do now, and has been for many years. Is like, if it's not accessible, your job's not done.
Yeah.
Because the like inaccessibility, especially on the web where I work, accessibility has been a bolt-on thing at the end. Like people literally would be like, quote the project and then have this extra bolt-on that costs extra much money, which is the accessibility part. And then
Yeah.
all the accessibility people are like, yeah, no, that is not the right approach to this. But and it's the same, right? It has changed over time in our community that people have gone from accessibility as a bolt-on, and anyone who says it's part of the job is a liar or is trying to, make my job harder. But now people have realized it. But the reason they've realized it is because people who traditionally did not use accessibility tools have become users of accessibility tools. Like you use screen readers to listen to articles on the web.
Mhm.
Podcasts now have auto captions because they index on Google. There are all these like peripheral reasons why the accessibility of websites has become more important, but it's all to convenience the people who don't require these tools, right? And I feel like in some small way, we're starting to move into that space with ethics too. That people are starting to see, like, there's been enough Cambridge Analytica type things. Like, you saw the Uber papers yesterday, right?
No. What is it something new?
Yes. I'll send you a link
No.
after. So there was like a drove of papers from Uber that were released by The Guardian and Le Monde and all these European papers that shows how Uber so up to 2017 was like collaborating with politicians and industry and like actively paying people, and it was a massive rampant corruption. And at one point they even said they were like encouraging their workers to go protest the protests in Paris, and then the workers were like, but someone will get hurt. And then the The head of Uber was like, violence is good for us. If someone gets hurt, that's a good thing because that'll give people, people feel compassion for our workers. So all that released yesterday. And what I'm seeing is the conversation has shifted from, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. This is the first time I've ever heard of malfeasance in tech, to more like, look, seriously, how many times do we need to hear this story before something happens? Right? It's a techlash V2 or V3 or V4 at this point. So
it's expected. Like the ethical reputation of the tech industry right now is in the toilet. I recently advised an undergraduate honors thesis for a student who just graduated, and she interviewed computer science majors who were graduating soon. So this is happening in like March, and most of them were just about to graduate. So they were on the job hunt at the time. And she talked to them about how they were deciding where to take a job. And they didn't start off talking about this, but the underlying research question she was interested in was like, how much does the ethical reputation of the company matter to you, and what kinds of trade-offs are you willing to make? And there were some interesting findings, but the one that like really got to me were that basically all of them, this was a small sample, like 12 students at our university, but basically all of them, when she asked them, like, do you think that the stuff you're learning about ethics in your classes will help you get a job? And everyone said no, basically. And several of them were like, yeah, no, I'm pretty sure that would actively make me not get a job.
Because you're the wet blanket, right?
Yeah. And I've been thinking about this for a while, and this is sort of a research question that I would be interested in delving into. So I suspect and would love to know empirically whether this is true, that job applicants are not being asked questions related to ethics or values or that sort of thing in job interviews. And I also suspect that most applicants are not asking a lot of questions about the ethics or values of the company during job interviews, even though like software engineers, technologists, etc., are kind of in demand. Like people typically have options for where to work. So it seems unlikely to me that would be like oh no, if I ask a question like that, I'm never going to get a job. But I understand the anxiety. So like I get it. But I actually think that if we could change both of those things, it could actually be really helpful. Because I can tell you, if Google started asking questions about ethics in their technical job interviews, all of the computer science departments would start caring more about it and teaching it. Because the last thing that like MIT or Stanford or whatever wants is for their students to be embarrassed on a job interview because they don't know something.
So we just have to go convince Google to do this. That sounds like a completely super simple thing that we can. No problem.
It's a bit of a catch-22 there. Because the other thing is, like, in theory, applicants could be asking these kinds of questions and then turning down jobs when they don't get good answers. And I've heard, like, anecdotally that like new graduates are not flocking to especially Facebook as much as they used to, because there's this perception that like it's an unethical company. And there was a paper published last year in my field about Techlash, where they talked to tech workers, and one of the things that I remember from this paper was people saying that like they really didn't like going home and like answering questions about their job at like Thanksgiving or whatever. So I think that like the ethical reputation of these companies is starting to have an impact on, certainly on PR, but also potentially like losing good talent. And those are very like concrete business incentive reasons to consider doing better. But Uber's a great example because like we've been seeing this for years, right?
Yeah.
Like there have been so I wrote a paper about one of Uber's ethical scandals. Like this has been happening forever, and they're still there.
Yeah. And there's a whole crew of other companies that are trying to emulate their model, right? And it's even in the language. People are saying like the Uber of X industry, which is very disturbing. I remember when Uber was trying to get in Vancouver, where I live, and everyone, all the politicians were like, yes, this is a great idea. And I'm like, are you not aware? Do you not read papers? Do you not read about what happens in the cities? And then it literally went live like 2 days before the lockdown. So I have no idea how that actually worked out. I do see Uber drivers around now, but it was the big, like, everything's going to change thing didn't happen so much. I like to say, to try to approach this, I like to say that people perceive ethics as a wet blanket to quell our creative flames, but it's actually more like a hearth that directs the heat where it's supposed to go and not burn down the house in the process. Because it's hard. Like, I made an ethics course as part of my job, and I did the very difficult thing, and I'm not sure I succeeded. Which is, I said, like, there's this thing called ethics, and here are 4 models. And I actually went in and like, so this is the ontology, and this is the other, and here's how it relates directly to tech. Yeah, but it's like, here's how this relates to tech, and here's how you can use all of these things together, right? They're not competing. They're part of a large mesh. And if you take the best parts of each of them and you take lessons from each of them and apply it to your craft, it becomes this critical tool you can use to test your decision making, and also gives you the language to talk to your boss about why, because you have this, what is the term? I think I heard it from you first, the ethics smells, right?
Oh, no.
Or is someone else, there's someone who started talking about ethics smells like this. Oh no, it's Shannon Valor who was talking about ethics smells. Like, this has an ethics smell, but I don't know what it is, right? And giving people the vocabulary to be able to make a concrete statement about, this is uncomfortable, and here are the reasons why, or here are the possible, like, avenues that we go down that leads us to this problematic place. But I want to shift gears a little bit, because you also wrote this paper, or this article, about the Black Mirror reading club, right?
The Black Mirror writers' room.
Right, writers' room. And I remember, like, that is so good that I expose all my students to it, and it's like the best way of introducing ethics, because it's amazing. You have a room full of 20 people, and you get them to write horrific dystopia about tech. That takes 2 minutes, and then you have the most alarming content you could possibly imagine. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so gosh, so now I'm trying to think of where it did come. So I did it in one of my first classes that I taught as a faculty member. So it was probably like 2017 or something.
Mhm.
And it was just like a let's do this in like what would happen if we were going to write episodes of Black Mirror, because it was like around the time that one of the seasons came out and people wanted to talk about it a lot. But the slide deck, like, where people can like make things that look like episodes, actually came because I was teaching a summer program for incoming first-gen students, and I was supposed to do like an ethics information science module, and they're like, and they need to make something that they can show their parents. And so that's where that idea came from. And then it's so cool. I mean, actually, like, way back when in my training, like, I was actually, like, my master's degree, I did a bunch of work on learning sciences, and was trained in like constructionism, which is like the thing out of the MIT Media Lab, where it's like, if you make things that are personally meaningful, you learn better. And actually, like, I think they're really cool, to like create this artifact that like looks like the title page for a Black Mirror episode. And also, because of that, I could create the slide deck that other people could use to do this in their own classes. And so I think I did that around like 2018 or 2019. And then I wrote this thing about it. And then also, like, I gotta hand it to Cory Doctorow. Like every time something I do goes viral, it's because he saw it, because he also wrote about this as well. But interestingly, so you mentioned you've used it before. So a lot of people have used this in their classes. And last year, I had my PhD student, Shamika, interview a bunch of instructors who've used it, about how it went and what students came up with and suggestions they had for making it better and that sort of thing. And we published a paper about it earlier this year. But the thing out of it that I really latched onto was some people talking about this problem that I mentioned earlier of like imagining harms to yourself and how much easier that is. And so something that I've been thinking a lot about lately is how could we use that kind of speculation exercise to help people, especially think about harms to people other than themselves, harms to marginalized groups. So actually, sometime in the next year, Shamika is going to be running a version of that exercise with groups of Black women to see how what they come up with is different than what we've seen from, a lot of classes that are often largely white men. So I've been trying to, in running the exercise now, like try to prompt students to think about these kinds of things. But I'd like to think of even better ways to do that. A lot of my work more recently has been focusing on this idea of speculation, in part because I have some grant funding for that. So I'm excited about digging into that even more. And the way that I've been talking about this is like, if you can get super excited about imagining the ethical implications of some technology that someone might create in 50 or 100 years, why can't you do the same thing with like what you're creating right now, right? So like, it should be the same kind of skill set. And so I'm like, if you can have fun doing this, like, can you also have fun doing this? Except people don't like to imagine how their well-intentioned technology might be misused or whatever. But I think we should be doing more of that.
Yeah. The way I do it is I combined it with another exercise. So we had this exercise we had like two hats. And then in one hat, there was an entity. So it could be like a spy or a dolphin or like or a person or, a pregnant woman. It was very, very random. And then in the other one, we had some sort of thing, like an object in the world. And then they were like asked to come up with some design for this particular persona with using this thing, right? And I combined that and then changed the type of person in the bucket so that it was less dolphins, more real people, right? And introduced mainly stress cases for everything. So it was like a person with a broken arm, or a person who lives in a marginalized community, or someone who has who lost all their money, or something like that. And then the students pull out of a hat this difficult persona, and then they have to come up with some technology that seems unproblematic, that we already have, like an existing technology in the world, and then they have to figure out how to build the scenario around that. And then, after mitigating 2 days of everyone complaining about their persona, and I can't design for this particular case, can I trade with someone else? When we're past that, it actually produces some pretty good outcomes. But the reason, like, there's a segue here. It's not like everything I saw from you is from 4 years ago. The reason I'm bringing it up is because you've gone on a bit of a journey towards like popularizing tech ethics and making it something people talk about, to the point you now have a TikTok channel with almost 100,000 followers that talks about tech ethics, which is like not the thing you would expect to have a huge following. And your content gets so much interaction and so much quality interaction. Like, yes, there's stuff on there that shouldn't be there, as with all social media, but there's also clearly interest and clearly critical thinking around this stuff. So what brought you to, how did you come up with this idea that I'm going to take tech ethics and put it on TikTok?
So I didn't actually. That's not how my TikTok account started. um,
Wait, do you mean if I scroll far enough back, I find something else?
oh yeah, no. If you scroll far enough back, you'll find about like 4 or 5 months before I made anything that was related to my research or tech ethics at all. Because so during the pandemic, I started, and in case anyone's seeing this is interested in graduate school, during the summer of 2020, I started a YouTube channel with advice for graduate students and particularly for PhD applicants, because I've been running PhD admissions in my department forever. And it was really taking off. And I was like, oh my God, this is so great. I'm helping people. And then I noticed from my analytics on YouTube that however YouTube categorizes this, that most of my engagement was coming from men. And so I asked people, I was like, where could I go so that more women could see my advice on applying to PhD programs? And someone suggested TikTok. And I was like, that makes no sense because TikTok isn't a search engine. Like, people don't go to TikTok to find PhD application advice. But like, this would take you way too long to do right now, but if sometime you want to scroll to the very bottom.
Oh no, I've seen your lives where you still do this. So this makes sense. Like I've seen your...
you'll find like some like videos about PhD applications, and like the second one that I made, it got like 50,000 views overnight. And all the comments were people like, I'm applying to PhD programs right now. This is amazing. And I was like, oh my God, this is the best recommender system I've ever seen. So most of my content for like 4 or 5 months was graduate student advice, academic. I was like doing skits of like academic humor for a while. And then I made one video because it was a stitch of something about racism in technology. And it took off. Like one of my most viral videos I've ever had, it was maybe like 200,000 or 300,000 views. And then I made a follow-up to it that was about racist soap dispensers. And that one did even better. And I was shocked. Like, I didn't think that I didn't think that there was going to be an audience for that kind of thing on TikTok. Like, I'd seen other educational content, and then when I saw when I started realizing that there were a lot of people who were seeing my videos who like had never been exposed to the idea that algorithms can be biased, which like, I'm guessing for most people watching this, like that's well, obviously, right? But like not everyone has been exposed to these kinds of ideas. And so I was like, I'm gonna start making this kind of content. And I actually think that like science communication stuff around these kinds of issues are really important. And I can only think of a handful of folks on TikTok who are talking about this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's been really cool how it's kind of taken off. And I've gotten good feedback on it from like my academic community too. Like, people, for the most part, I mean, well, okay, if people think that I'm like being silly and it's like unprofessional or whatever, they're not telling me.
I think all they're seeing is,
and I did just get tenure.
I can't keep 10 people in a classroom. She has like 300,000 people responding to a random 3-minute video about this super, quite technical subject that goes through like, here's a bunch of material, and if you read this stuff, but I think this is what's so valuable about TikTok, is that you get this opportunity to, first of all, you're forced to like contextualize things very quickly, right? But then secondly, once people respond, you can have a conversation with them, both in the comments and in like response videos, and then the response videos spawn their own comments, and there's the huge, and you can kind of interlock all these pieces of information. So there's something, it's funny, it's like I work on making video education for the web, right? And I keep being asked, what does this work for, right? Because when people hear TikTok and they're not familiar with the platform, they think, oh, it's like dancing and music. And it's true. If you go down that route, that's all there is. But if you go down the like political TikTok, there's a whole world of that. If you go down like tech ethics TikTok, there's a whole world of that too. And you've kind of bubbled to the surface on that area that I see people refer to your content or like ping you and say, hey, like someone posts something and they go, I want to hear what Professor Casey has to say about this, right? So
What's
you're a bit
your?
of a pioneer, I would say, on this.
I mean, I mean, I think also like me being an academic, like
Yeah.
like there are a lot of professors on TikTok actually. Some of them are doing content related to their like area of expertise, and some of them it's more like academia,
Mhm.
you know, related content. But so the other day I installed TikTok on my smart TV. And so I was scrolling through it without being logged in for a little
Yeah.
while. And I was like,
What is this?
I scrolled through for 20 minutes and didn't see a single piece of educational content.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know what your FYP is like, but mine is like, I mean, well, okay, like over the past few, like my content is like half like social justice and half like scientists and doctors debunking COVID misinformation.
Yes. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Like it's really like mostly either social justice or education related content, and then like a little bit of like Dungeons and Dragons and cosplay.
Mhm.
um but other people's FYPs are very different. But I love the idea that like every once in a while, one of my videos is
Yeah.
someone's gonna be scrolling through like teenagers dancing, and then suddenly there's me being like, and AI bias, right? Like that's the magic. That's the
Yeah.
magic.
It's
Yeah.
my FYP is very much like our space, like the tech ethics space, and all this critique of technology and social justice and COVID disinformation. And then because of the content I post, and I'm in Canada, there's a bunch of Canada content, but it's very political. And then every once in a while, I start getting like the extreme right. And I think it's just because the people who comment on my stuff. I think the
Mm,
algorithm is seeing like a bunch of people are commenting on my stuff and basically trying to argue against me. And then because of that, the algorithm's like, oh, you're interested in this far right crap. And then I'm like, I watch it and then I sit there and I'm like, I want to respond to this. I'm just going to block this person instead because this is causing me rage and I can't handle this rage. Uh, and then I have like metal music. But my wife is like food, like, you know, how to make healthy food and how to like devise games for kids. And we live in alternate universes. And
yeah.
that's something that you've been talking about too, right? This both content moderation on TikTok and also how like these algorithms shape what we see because you know the Google bubble situation on TikTok is like a million times more extreme than what the Google one is.
Though an interesting thing I think about TikTok is that people are so much more aware of what's happening there. Like I think that I mean actually so I have several colleagues who have been studying like folk theories of algorithms on TikTok,
Mhm.
like how people think the algorithm works both on
Oh,
TikTok and in other
the
contexts.
giant
Yeah.
whiteboards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like yeah, the
People
like
are trying to
screens,
like
yeah.
reverse engineer the algorithm,
Yeah,
which is an
one of my
amazing amount
colleagues
of
had
work.
people draw it, I think. But you know, so one of the things they've talked about is how like it seems like people who spend a lot of time on TikTok like might actually have sort of more algorithmic literacy than the average person because they're thinking, especially people who create content, because they're
Mhm.
thinking about how and people talk about like I just saw a video come across my FYP yesterday where someone was like, "Let me teach you how to train your algorithm." Um, and so but when people go to Google, they're not thinking about that.
Yeah.
Or even Facebook. Like I did a study a few years ago of how people reacted to the Facebook emotional contagion study. Do you remember that?
Yep.
Like when it turned out like some scientists with Facebook researchers were showing people more positive or more negative content in order to see if it influenced how they posted afterwards. And one of the things we found out was that a lot of people were really upset about that study, not because of what the manipulation that they did, but because they didn't know that there was an algorithm.
Yeah.
Like they didn't know that there was anything curating their content. But people on TikTok know that that's what's happening. So they know that their friend scrolling through their phone next to them is seeing a different view of the world. And I think that if people had more of acknowledgement of that in other spaces like Google or Facebook, that would be an improvement
Yeah.
for how
Well,
people see the world.
I think people know because it's so blatantly obvious. Right?
Exactly.
Like I clicked the other day, I was looking for something specific and their search is awful, right? It's like if you watch it, if you randomly pan through a video and you go, oh, that was interesting, and then you like swipe the wrong way and then it resets, and there's no way of finding that video again.
Yeah.
And I was searching for something, and I somehow ended up on like a deathcore singer who was doing covers where he was singing on top of someone else. And I was watching it for a couple of seconds because I'm like, do I know this person? It looks a lot like someone I know. And then I was like, no, I don't. And now for the past 2 days, it's like I keep getting these deathcore singers covering on top in between the content I actually want to watch. And then I now have to actively like, no, I don't want this. No, I don't want this, so that it goes away. But it's very blatant that there's curation happening on algorithm level. There's a question for this. It's a very long question. How ethical is it that algorithms decide based on metrics and watch time how valuable content is? An example is that, what I mean is, I feel Jim Jarmusch never could be a YouTube star, etc., etc., etc. It feels unethical that algorithms excel the old-fashioned sales logic into the heads of everyone.
Well, I mean, so there's I mean, this is an interesting question, like the sort of ethics of the signals that go into any recommender system, right? So this came up a lot in the Facebook papers. So remember the story from, well, there were a bunch of them about this, but like the stories about how in the signals of the Facebook curation algorithm, angry reactions were given more weight than likes. That's a really interesting example of this. It's not exactly what you're asking about here, but it's the same kind of thing, right? Like making decisions about what content gets pushed, and this idea that like content that makes people angry is going to keep them on the site longer. They're going to engage with content that makes them angry. Now, I actually think that's a very like that is something that is perhaps something we shouldn't be doing. Right. And that's where we've got like a business incentive at odds with perhaps an ethical decision. I mean, and in the case of TikTok, so a lot of people have sort of surmised that watch time seems to be a lot more important than likes, for example. Like that seems to be the conventional wisdom as far as I can tell. Here's an interesting side effect of that. So if you watch a video because you really don't like it, and because you're outraged, the same thing about the same thing as the Facebook thing. I see this happen a lot with like, actually a really good example of this is like body positivity content. Gets a lot of hate from fat phobic people. And one of the reasons that probably happens in terms of signals to an algorithm is that you see this come across your FYP, you're like, oh my God, this person. And then you open it up and you type a content about how awful you think they look or whatever. And the video keeps playing in the background. And so you get
and you're sitting there like making it extra evil. Like the comment has to be extra harsh. Takes time.
And so then to an algorithm, it looks like, what are the signals? The signals are watch time, and you left a comment, and these kinds of things. Now, are there other ways this could be done? I mean, there's no way that people at TikTok haven't thought of this. So but what if sentiment analysis of comments was part of the signal? So if you're leaving a really angry comment on something, maybe it doesn't show you more of that kind of content. Like, again, there's no way they haven't thought about this kind of thing. And I have no idea what they've tried or what they're doing. But that would be an example of something that might be helpful for not hurting people.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this is, if you think about the evolution of TikTok, it did go from here's an app where you can sing along with other people
Yeah.
to here's an app where you can get like health information about a pandemic and also like health disinformation about a pandemic, and it looks the same. And here's an app where you can get like, someone talking about the harms of SWJs, and then a whole community of SWJs saying, look, I think you're missing the point here, right? And it's a very tricky. I can't imagine what it's like for the engineers to sit on the back of that and be like, what do we do here? Because you see how like when Twitter started doing some form of like very low level moderation, when they're like, actual, death threats and very, 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 very harsh things that in any other context would be an arrestable offense should probably not happen. And the pushback they got was so aggressive, right? And then some dude was like, I'm going to buy the whole thing just to take it away.
I mean, I do not envy any of these platforms and the work that they're having to do on content moderation, because it is an incredibly hard problem. And take Twitter for an example, like the example you just gave of Twitter. Like, Twitter has been heavily criticized for years, both for moderating content too much and for moderating content too little.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way that they could do it that wouldn't make a lot of people really angry. And the kind of automated content moderation that has to be done at scale, like it is like, yes, we should be hiring more moderators and paying them well and paying to care for their mental health and that kind of thing as well. But there's still a limit. They're gonna have mistakes. Like, there's absolutely no way they're not gonna have mistakes. So if I had like a bone to pick with TikTok and how they're handling content moderation, it's not that their automated content moderation has mistakes, because of course it does. And I think it even has systematically biased mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that the redress system is not good.
Yeah.
The appeals system, as far as I can tell, and I've also like interviewed some people about this already, like it appears to be a bit of a disaster. Like, there's very little transparency, explainability. If you make a mistake, you don't even know what it was. So how are you supposed to not make it again? So like, that's where I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Like, if you're going to have mistakes, you have to have a really fair appeals process.
Yeah, I posted a video about the terror attack in Oslo, where someone attacked like the Pride, basically the party before the Pride parade. Someone went into a bar and shot people, right? And then my video was about how the public broadcaster in Norway, NRK, they had to delete over half of the comments. They deleted 1,700 comments in the posting that they had done. That was a posting for children. It's like they have a channel where they contextualize news for children. And in the comments, 1,700 out of 3,500 comments were celebrating the terrorists. So they went and deleted all those comments. And then my video got taken off TikTok for harassment. Right? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to appeal this because that's ridiculous. But, there was never, like, it eventually resurfaced. They were like, sorry, error. And then it came back. But there was no explanation. It took like 3 days. There was no process. You just say, hey, I don't like this. And then something happens on the back, and I guess someone watches it at some point. But then someone told me that if you get enough of these, you might get deplatformed. Even though they say, no, we made a mistake. If you get like 10 of them, even if they're all mistakes, they'll still be like, no, you passed some bars. We're just going to delete your account. And that is used as harassment.
That's
right?
what I've heard as well. There's a big problem with mass reporting which again is another reason there has to be a really, really good appeals system, because like it makes sense that they would have to like deal in some way with people reporting content, because that's also how you find bad content. But obviously that can be weaponized. If you know that can be weaponized, yeah, I do worry a bit about the moderation system on TikTok. I mean, like most of the people I talk to think that it's like completely broken. But that said, if I had to like a to be fair, you only see content moderation when it's broken.
Yeah,
so like you see it
true.
when you see content that you're like, how can that still be there? Like the person with the cleaning materials recently. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah,
People were like outraged.
the person that's like making mustard gas in their
Yeah,
toilet.
okay, exactly.
Yeah,
So a bunch of people were like, oh my God, how is this still up? So you see that as a potential error. And then you see when your content gets taken down and it shouldn't be.
yeah,
But what you don't see is content that gets taken down when it should be.
yeah.
Um,
I've
so
seen
it's
some of
hard
that
to know
content
how,
that
yeah.
gets posted and then disappears, because it just appears on your FYP for like 2 seconds and then it goes away and you go, what did I just watch? And then you scroll back up and it's gone. So clearly there is a system in place that does take away some things. So as we wrap up, I just wanted to say to the people watching this, if you go to TikTok and you go to Professor Casey and you click on the playlists, there's a playlist called Tech Ethics Class or something like that.
Yeah.
That is pure genius, because that's what we were talking about at the beginning, right? How do you make ethics into something that people talk about and is approachable and give people the vocabulary to talk about it? That's what you're doing on TikTok.
Yeah, I have a document that has like readings and like questions. It's based on my actual class that I teach. I found it kind of challenging to make these videos because it is actually really hard to like take some of these topics and distill them into a minute. So it's been kind of slow. Like I thought I was going to be done with it by now.
It's better when it trickles out over time.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So they're trickling out over time. Like I did one yesterday about patent trolls. But I've gotten a lot of sort of good feedback to the idea. I wish I could like figure out a way to make it more interactive somehow. And like I've been kind of brainstorming about this, and I'm like, maybe after I'm done with like a set of these videos, I'll do something that's more interactive. I don't know. I'm also like, I'll have a sabbatical soon, and I was like, maybe I'll teach an online class. That might be fun. We'll see.
You should come talk to me about that. All right. I know you have places to be and people to see, so we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
This was super exciting. I will totally email you again and ask you to come back to talk about more stuff, by the way.
Sure.
And for everyone who's watching this, Professor Casey is on Twitter and on TikTok. It's very easy to find and posts consistently solid content worth watching and reading and interacting with. So until next time, thank you all for watching. I hope you have a great rest of the week. Goodbye.